Growing up in rural central Iowa, I thought I knew flat. We could see gravel dust clouds thrown up by cars many, many miles away. But the summer I was around 13, a family vacation took us west through Nebraska on Highway 80. In my memory, the fields were bare, and we passed through a seemingly unending empty expanse for about 100 hours in our station wagon. This was before cell phones and tablets, and we couldn't watch movies. My mom needed a break from reading aloud. We couldn't even play I Spy with My Little Eye or roadside poker because there was only sun, sky, and dirt to deal with. My sisters and I in the back seat made the best of it, though. We found that there was plenty to complain about. And so we did. Our song of woe had many verses and a chorus of "This is so boring. Nebraska is so nothing." I'm sure this made the time pass more quickly for my parents. Not. Then, suddenly, my mom pointed excitedly and yelled triumphantly, "Look, there's a tree!" We all followed her finger and squinted. There in the far distance was a single tree, no discernible leaves on its branches. I wish I could say that my sisters and I commended my mom on her eagle eye, finding evidence of life and beauty in the midst of nothingness. But instead, we laughed and mocked her optimism until she wrote in her travel journal, "I will not talk to my family until they apologize." And I tell this story for two reasons. It shows that there are some people who look for possibilities, who are able to see a bright spot where most only see gloom. And that story also still makes me laugh. Look, there's a tree. It's good to have one of those people in one's family or a group of friends. Otherwise, the complaining choruses may never end. Who is your glimmer of positivity, your "look, there's a tree" person in your circles? Maybe it's you yourself. This morning, let's explore together, cultivating that impulse of curiosity, that impulse to look for possibilities for joy as individuals and as a congregation. To begin, we can learn from people in our lives who are already possibility seekers, like my mom. There's a great example of this different way of looking at life in a very short video I found in Soul Matters. Do you use Soul Matters materials here? I found this resource a few years ago, so I invite us to watch it now. The first time I watched that video years ago was the first time I freed myself from the glass half full, glass half empty dualistic worldview. It's a both and situation. Poet Ross Gay puts it this way: what if joy and pain are fundamentally tangled up with one another? Or even more to the point, what if joy is not only entangled with pain, suffering, or sorrow, but it's also what emerges from how we care for each other through those things? What if joy, instead of refuge or relief from heartbreak, is what effloresces from us as we help each other carry our heartbreak? Which is to say, what if joy needs sorrow? Maybe we're not all optimists, but we all have experienced times of great loss when we found ourselves, surprisingly, laughing and crying at the same time, usually with others. Have you read or heard of the book, We Heal Together, Rituals and Practices for Building Community and Connection? Anybody? I recommend it. You're going to hear more. When our book group got to the chapter, Moments of Joy and Wonder, every one of the participants had a story of a time of personal grief or hardship when laughter became contagious for at least that moment, felt joy and woe at the same time. And I invite you now to bring such a both-and experience that you've had to your mind. So joy and sorrow coexist, are maybe interdependent. What about the grief about our Earth's degradation? What about anger at the administration's thoughtless policies and cruel indifference to the suffering they cause? White middle-class people, like myself, can and must learn from historically and currently marginalized people, people of color, LGBTQ people, disabled people, about finding joy as not only self-care, but as Dave mentioned, as resistance to systems of oppression. Potawatomi botanist Robin Wall Kimmerer writes, "Even a wounded world is feeding us. Even a wounded world holds us, giving us moments of wonder and joy. I choose joy over despair, not because I have my head in the sand, but because joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return that gift." This is what our Unitarian Universalist value interdependence is about. I quote now, "We honor the interdependent web of all existence. With reverence for the great web of life and with humility, we acknowledge our place in it. We covenant to protect Earth and all beings from exploitation. We will create and nurture sustainable relationships of care and respect, mutuality, and justice. We will work to repair harm and damaged relationships." We might mentally interject joy in there. We joyfully honor the interdependent web, or with reverence for the great web of life and with humility, we joyfully acknowledge our place in it. I invite you now to think of a time when you gave the earth joy in return for its gift. In a garden, maybe, or caring for an animal. Just take a moment. Michelle Cassandra Johnson, author of that book I mentioned, We Heal Together, writes about how, as a Black cisgender woman, dominant culture works to steal her joy. She writes, "Dominant culture doesn't want us to center joy because if we do, and if we recognize joy might bring us closer to freedom, we might begin to operate outside of the norms of systems of dominance and instead strive to create our joy and create conditions for the collective to thrive. Experiencing joy feels like a slap in the face to systems that want us to feel oppressed, suppressed, and hopeless. Many of us have been so shamed when we have centered joy in our lives. This is a tool of the master, the system that says you are undeserving of peace, happiness, or your heart feeling full. This is deeply toxic and will only lead to more toxicity. Many passages in the Moments of Joy and Wonder chapter resonated with me. This one especially rang true. Capitalism works to make us consume things to gain a false sense of joy, as if buying our joy is the only way to experience it, when in fact it is impossible to buy joy and peace. I know that hit me because I have felt at times like I want to go shopping. It's kind of like eating when you're feeling bad. So reading that made me recognize that so-called shopping therapy is actually dangerous to our health. It also goes against that value of interdependence, buying to buy stuff, to accumulate, to feel good about ourselves, seems antithetical to nurturing sustainable relationships of care and respect, mutuality, and justice. In fact, it seems like a damaged relationship that we need to work on repairing. So put down our credit cards and get to work dismantling the systems of dominance, right? Roll up our sleeves and fight until we bend the arc of history to a just, equitable society. Right on. But wait, that's another trap. Johnson writes, even in our work to create change for the betterment of the world and us all, we are taught that the work we do to create change within ourselves and others must be challenging and joyless. For those of us working in movement circles, volunteering or organizing, there is a deep-rooted myth that we must die for the cause because this is the only way social change counts. We must work ourselves to death to create liberation for others at the expense of our own liberation. What to do? Johnson tells us we must turn toward developing practices to create, find, feel, and allow joy in our lives and movements for social change. Looking for the possibilities for justice or for joy. Could that be a spiritual practice? Joy is, in fact, an act of caring for ourselves and others in our lives. It really is another both-and situation. We work hard for justice and look for possibilities for joy in that work. A month or so ago, I went to see the comedian Kristen Key perform. Anybody Kristen Key fans? Okay, one, yay! I encourage you to look her up online. Towards the end of every show, she has a Q&A with the audience, which should tell you how brave she is. Many of the questions are hilarious themselves, people trying to be funnier even than the professional comedian. And so the crowd was just rocking with laughter. Then someone asked something along the lines of, God, how do you keep going? How do you keep going as a queer comedian when LGBTQ plus people's rights, the arts in general, and our whole democracy are under attack every day. How can you be funny? And her reply was something along the lines of finding joy and bringing laughter. Those are my resistance. I'm resisting that despair through creating laughter. Yeah. The next day happened to be the No Kings rally. And Kristen Key's words were really on my mind. And it changed my idea about what message to put on my sign. You know, before it was going to be, what can be the pithiest, meanest, you know, getting my anger out. But I searched the web for signs that speak truth to power with humor. And I found that unlike looking for something of interest on the Nebraska Plains road trip, there were lots of different possibilities. Here's the one I went with. Stop making me repeat myself. Signed, History. Even more than the witty signs that I saw online, what really made me laugh laugh out loud, were the people in inflatable animal costumes. Have you seen the frogs in Portland? And I found these beautiful unicorns. The MC at the Pittsfield rally I went to was dressed as a giant chicken. So going to the rally with the attitude of looking for joy, as well as joining my voice in angry protest, made all the difference for me. It was a small step in making the practice of seeing possibilities for joy a habit. Johnson reminds us we need to feel joy and remember it is available to us and will likely visit us again in moments of despair, when we are grieving and when we feel lost. We need to remember that what brings us joy in moments when it feels as if all is lost. If you find yourself feeling guilty about experiencing joy, be kind to yourself and remember that feeling guilt or shame about experiencing joy, feeling guilt or shame in a moment of joyousness could lead to more heaviness. And the world is already heavy enough, as we well know. I try to remember the inflatable frogs, unicorns, and chickens when I despair for our country. They are an uplifting reminder of creative resistance. Yes, the ever more divisive and chaotic political environment. I mean, when you think it can't get more divisive and more chaotic, I'm never surprised anymore. That environment challenges all Unitarian Universalists to go even further to find joy as we oscillate between anxiety and anger. As Reverend Soto reminds us, moving through or with anxiety is hard. There is so much unseen labor in managing everything just under the surface. I invite you now to remember an experience of community resistance that brought you joy amidst anxiety or anger. Dave listed a multitude of examples that you can maybe bring to mind right now. Activist Shira Erlichman wrote an essay in December 2024. Remember? how you felt in December of 2024. That essay was called On the Utilities of Anger, describing the physical and emotional experience recognizable to many of us then and maybe now. She wrote, without going into the bloody details, the last few months have brought a rage that won't be ignored, siloed, managed, or silenced. I've had to sit and walk and tremble with rage. It's taken over my body, my sleep, my appetite, my capacity. Oh, no. Yeah. After unsuccessfully trying many ways to control her anger, Erlichman let go and got curious about rage and started researching, observing that, quote, Black women unsurprisingly remain foundational teachers on the utilities of rage. Inspired by interviews with June Jordan, Erlichman had an epiphany. I must get to know my heart in its fullness, rage included. I must refuse to exile any part of myself or my identity. So where is the place of joy in this discourse on rage? It's a both-and situation. For Erlichman, joy is not rage's nemesis, after all, but its wise older sister. Always remember that the cultivation of joy must not merely exist alongside rage, but as a lantern, throwing clarity all over it. Our capacity to address our anger and not be consumed by it relies on joy. What revitalizes us and reminds us of our humanness? What highlights why we're here in the first place? What teaches our heart's openness? Joy. Part of her conclusion echoed comedian Kristen Key's perspective. She wrote, laughter is itself a worthwhile prayer. Laughter is itself a worthwhile prayer. To me, Erlichman's words are both inspiring and daunting, because they imply that we're going to need to sustain a spiritual practice of anger, curiosity, joy for at least the next 2.5 years, probably longer. Fortunately, we have many things going for us as UUs individually and in community. We have experience finding and expressing anger and joy in tough times, and we are not alone in that experience. The COVID years were harsh teachers in this respect. As individuals and as congregations, we have the people with whom we are in covenant for mutual support. We have other partner congregations. We have local partner organizations as well. Also, staying open and curious are cherished traits of Unitarian Universalists. Combating defensive tendency to circle the wagons, we open the circle. Do we make mistakes? Cast judgment, turn our anger on false targets? Yes. Yes, we do. We have and we will. And we know from experience that we can name our mistakes, ask and give forgiveness, and return to our anger and joy-fueled work, dismantling the systems of injustice, inequity, and oppression. It's a both-and situation. Friends, when we are feeling bored and cranky, when we are grieving, when we are anxious, when we are quivering with anger, there can be joy. There must be joy if we are to be who we say we are and do what we say we do. We will create and nurture sustainable relationships of care and respect, mutuality and justice. We will work to repair harm and damaged relationships. May we bring along our elephants and still make room for what may be possible. May we practice joy that defies oppression. May we remember that life is a beautiful glass. And in our times of fear and rage and struggle, may we remember that laughter itself is a worthwhile prayer. May it be so.